This is Words Aptly Spoken, which comes from Proverbs 25:11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. The written word is a precious treasure. We want to preserve written knowledge for God's glory and as an anchor to the history of the church and its classical conversations. We hope to encourage the reading of words and of the word. So, welcome to Words Aptly Spoken, where Jennifer Courtney, Tim Knotts, and I discuss books from the Classical Conversations curated curriculum. This is Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. I'm Lee Bortons, and today we're also joined by Classical Conversations instructional designer Amy Jones. Jennifer, first tell us about this month's shows.
So we've been working our way through resources for younger learners. So last week we talked about scribblers. Today we'll do the Writing Road to Reading. And then for the last 3 weeks of the month, we are going to read some stories from Ancient World Echoes, Exploring Insects with Uncle Paul, and Kings of Rome.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this because those were all developed once my children were gone, and now I'm getting to enjoy those books with my grandchildren. So you can access the upcoming episodes, this episode, and any past episodes on at my leebortons.com YouTube channel, and you can go to my website leebortons.com and click on the various tiles to get to those YouTube channels. Jennifer, before we get started, Amy hasn't been on our show that much. Let's give her a minute to introduce herself.
Be great.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, I work with a team over in training and support, and we make lots of supporting documents and resources for families. That's one of my favorite things to do, to envision people using and being encouraged to continue their homeschooling journey. So that's basically what I do during my week. And then I have homeschooled all our children. We had the privilege of doing that through CC. And now we have 9 grandchildren, and 5 of them are now at a CC community. So that's super cool. I get to go and sit in and at opening and hear their timeline songs, and they're always
Fun.
singing. It's so wonderful. So it's great to see it come around.
Yeah, and you were a major contributor to our scribblers that we talked about last week. So it's good for people to put another face to see that it really is lifelong learners working on these materials.
Yes,
so thanks for your efforts.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
All right, Jennifer, what's your question?
Okay, so this book has been around a while, this Writing Road to Reading, and I want to know how it became part of the Classical Conversations curriculum.
Yeah, so a lot of people won't know this, but the Writing Road to Reading was the very first book I ever studied as a homeschooler. So I had a lot of Christian girlfriends around me in my neighborhood that kept telling me about this homeschooling thing, and I was not a Christian at the time. They kept inviting me to various courses and churches and creation seminars, and they just did not give up. And eventually I did give my life to the Lord, thanks to their diligence and the work of the Holy Spirit. And so one of the courses that we took together first was offered actually at a Seattle University on phonics. And the Writing Road to Reading was the course material that they used. And so for about 8 weeks, maybe 10 weeks, we hiked in, it was a little bit of a drive into town and took the course. And that was my introduction to pedagogy and classical literature and classical methods, because the Writing Road to Reading is something that's timeless. And so as we raised our children, that's how I taught all of them to read. I used other stuff. There's other things to help you, and we can talk more about this later on in the conversation. But when people, when we first started putting together the foundations curriculum, and that's that age where parents are teaching their kids to read, I was like, I know how to teach people how to use this curriculum. And so it's been in the program ever since.
Nice. Yeah, I forget sometimes how, it's good for our audience to be reminded too that sometimes we had to go make more sacrifices in those early days to track down resources. You couldn't just Google, how do I teach the Writing Road to Reading? That was not a thing. So
no, it wasn't. We did the same thing, the same group of us. We hired somebody who actually came to one of our homes, and for 10 weeks, she taught us how to teach math. And we paid a lot of money for these courses, but we were happy to do it. And, we were young, newly married people, but we were the pioneers, and we knew it just took sacrifice. So we did it.
Oh, that's great. It's good to be reminded of that. So they always say that if you're having a philosophy discussion, there's a limited amount of time before Hitler comes up, because he's the epitome of evil. I'm going to make this transition to reading. Trust me, there's a segue here. It doesn't take, I would guess it's about the same number of minutes when you're discussing education before problems with literacy come up. So since we're going to talk about how to teach kids how to read today, I wanted to give Tim a little bit of space to talk about the problem of literacy and why does this always come up in educational conversations.
Yeah, we've been messing with education for a long time now, experimenting in methods and sadly experimenting on children through those methods. And really we're seeing the evil fruit of that. And I think it's not an exaggeration to say that this is really the sign of the decline of a civilization. When literacy rates begin to decline, they've been climbing for hundreds of years, ever since books became widely available with the printing press and the revolution, as far as the availability of books to the masses. And we're kind of declining back from a literate people into a visual based society, which is really sad. Reading is the thing that gives us access to teachers. It gives us access to hear from people who have learned and labored for wisdom across all places and all times. If it doesn't sell YouTube videos, it doesn't exist in the world of the visual market. But these books last. They stick around. Reading is really important. It does a lot of things for us apart from just give us specific knowledge. There's a lot of studies out there that show that being a reader gives us improved memories. It expands our vocabulary, gives us longer concentration spans. It assists us with being critical thinkers. It gives us a broader imagination. And even more than that, it gives us protection. It helps us to be sort of inoculated against the changing times. Orson Welles gives us a really strong warning about that in Animal Farm, as the animals on the farm are not able to read. And so they lose the ability to know when the rules are being changed on them. And in the world that we live in today, the rules are constantly in threat of being changed. And so reading widely, reading deeply into the past, it sets us up for knowing things and knowing things beyond what's just generally available around us in the society and the culture.
Yeah, and we touched on that some when we were just discussing amusing ourselves to death too, when he talked about literacy rates and the importance of worshiping a God who reveals himself in the written word. And so that's always been a project for Christians to have literacy so we can read the word. And homeschool families took up that call pretty well at the beginning of things. So Amy, tell us a little bit about so if we can all agree that we do want our kids to read, because of all the wonderful things that Tim just said, we want good literacy statistics here. So tell us about the different ways that that people have gone about doing that, and maybe even touch on some of the experiments that Tim mentioned.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was reading an article, they call it the reading war. And the reading war is between the whole language, whole word, look-say, language experience. All of those are programs that have made their way through our public educational system over the years. I taught a number of years ago for a decade and a half, and went through several of those swings from whole language to language experience. And so it's that sight, word, vocabulary, visual focus, memory, memorize the word. So there's that camp where you're just looking at like a sight word, you memorize it, and it goes through repetition, and kids just get flashcards. So there's that camp, which evidently has been losing since the pandemic. There's been some studies out that parents, when they were home with their kids, reverted to phonics And then there's the other swing, which is the phonics based learning that's been around for hundreds of years, and it's stable. It's more stable. So that's the phonetic school of thought, is the idea that words are composed of different sounds and meaning groupings of sounds. They're constructed in certain ways. They have patterns that you can memorize. There are about 70 phonographs in our language and about 29 rules. So if you can memorize those, you can pretty much decode or decipher words that you're not familiar with. And what phonics does that whole language doesn't, and I don't want to say we don't memorize words, we do. We're automaticity. We look at words and we can't help but read words that we're familiar with. But what phonics does is it helps us make sense. It takes the mystery out of reading for children, and it helps them it's like a key to help them unlock the word. And what I love about phonics is, and I'm a phonics nerd, so please forgive me and stop me. But what I love about phonics is that it engages everything. It engages your visual, it engages your hearing, your auditory, your listening, you're hearing those sounds. It engages your writing it. And what I love is it engages your memory. So when children go, when you say, and children will immediately go like, ooh, that's like saying, or mommy or milk. It's like all of a sudden those sounds start they have a context for them. It starts stirring their, sort of their imagination, and words, the sound of words feel good on your tongue. So it's very engaging and inviting. So to me, phonics, some people think it's like, oh, phonics, but it's really wonderful. And to me, it's a real celebration of how God gives delight in language. I mean, he didn't just give us words that lay on a page. He gives us words that bring a lot of pleasure when we're reading. So yeah, so you can clearly tell which camp I'm in.
Yeah. I love that. I'm grateful because my testimony is that my mom grew up with whole language instruction and was a slow reader for life. And because of that, she was determined that even if I wasn't learning phonics at school, I would learn them at home. And so that's been a blessing in my life to set me off on a good reading path. But if I go back to what you just said, I'm wondering if I think I've heard this analogy somewhere. I don't think this is original to me, but I think it's apt that teaching whole language would be like teaching your kids one piece of music. And then when you go to the next piece of music, you'd have to learn that whole piece of music again. Whereas the phonetic method is more like, I'm going to teach you all the notes in the scale, and now you'll be able to read any piece and decode anything.
Yes. And I think what happens, I think as adults, we have memorized so many words, but so we think children go through that same process. They'll just remember incremental words. And I think that's where the whole language movement sort of started, is that you can just memorize words, but you're really only tapping into just a visual memory. So to me, with phonics, it's sort of, I compare it to bird watching. I can learn certain birds by never seeing a field guide, but when you handed me that field guide, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I recognize these parts of it, and there's these aspects that I can see, these markings and these behaviors that kind of open up the world. And I think that that's what phonics can do. It's really giving your children real stable tools that they can apply, yes, to any situation. So, and they can apply it as adults. You're still applying it. When you read a technical journal that you don't know the vocabulary, you revert to your phonics lessons, and then when you pronounce it and you recognize the word, you go, oh, I know that word. It's kind of it's a wonderful gift that we can offer to our kids. So, yeah.
So, and that's the thing I want to add on. I mean, great. That was great discussion, Amy. And it is for our kids, but it's first for the adult in the room. If the adult doesn't like, teaching phonics can be very hard to your children, children, right, to learn, but it's easier to do it if you know it first. And that's what I think is really important about homeschooling, is how many of us struggled before we had to struggle with our children. We struggled with it ourselves. So I thought I knew phonics really well. I was a voracious reader. And then I'm 23 with these two little boys, and I'm taking this course. And I read all kinds of books. And once I went through the Spalding's cards and the phonics and those 29 rules, all of a sudden I could read a lot more things that I didn't even try to read before, like you were just mentioning, whether it's a science book or maybe a political discussion or something ancient literature, because now I was seeing more words. Because one thing that they teach us in Writing Road to Reading is there's really very few exceptions. And I'd always been taught that there was a lot of exceptions. And by seeing the rules for what looked like exceptions, it made it so that I could read those other words that were just, maybe spelled a little difficult or funny or had a Latin or Greek root to them. So it's for so Writing Road to Reading, we don't want parents to think it's a book you buy to do with your children. It's not. It's a book
No.
you buy to teach yourself.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's the what do you call them? Grandmother books.
Yes, it's a grandmother book. It should guide all the other phonics books you buy.
Yes.
In other words, it's that book of wisdom. And so that's what once I knew the phonics well, then I was good at picking out phonics books for my children to read. And no matter what phonics system or phonics book it was, I could teach from it because I knew absolutely all the rules.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that the way the book is set up is she doesn't assume that you know how to do these things. It's definitely set up to teach, like you can take it in and go, oh, there's not a mystery. I think sometimes what I've heard younger moms say is that I could never do that because I don't know how to teach them how to read. And it's like it's some mysterious process that people that are professionals have to engage in, do. That we turn them like, oh, I couldn't do that. And she basically walks you through that it's not a mysterious process, but it is something that you're rightly, it requires your work and effort. It's so gratifying when you start going, oh, I wish I had known that, kind of like with you, Jennifer, like, oh, I wish I'd known that, or your mom determined not to have that happen to you. So yeah, it definitely takes effort. And so, yeah.
The other thing that you mentioned was like how it's natural. And to me, it expresses creation phonics because each phonogram was designed as a written symbol that leads you to placing your air, your lips, your tongue, and your throat into a certain position as you either push air out of it or bring air into it. And so each phonogram models for you, or tells you, I should say, what you're supposed to be doing with your body. And that's where Spalding came up with this system, because she taught highly dyslexic and disabled children how to read. And she realized, like everything else, if they couldn't control their body, they weren't going to be able to control the reading aloud of words. And so she tied it to she tied the phonetic system very clearly to what your body's doing.
Good.
Yeah, that's good. So talk to us a little bit about, you've mentioned it a couple times, these phonograms. Tell us what that means, Lee. What's a phonogram?
Look, these things are 38 years old.
I love you.
I still have my original cards.
I love it.
And here's why. Andrew Curran likes to say that homeschooling mothers are going to save Western civilization. And I know Tim and Amy and Jen and I all have libraries that are ridiculously big, because we feel like on the other side of whatever calamity and civilization's coming, we're going to be ready with the right books and instruction. So I've hung on to my cards because of Andrew Curran. We're going to be ready.
I love it.
Phonics classes for everyone.
Yeah. So what's nice about the cards is like, so R, and you can say but on the back, he gives an example word and then tells you what to do in order to pronounce it. So there's instruction with it. And what a wonderful thing to stick a rubber band around and take to the park. A lot of times my littler ones were waiting on older ones for sports. And I always tried to have something in the car, like scribblers, to engage them while I knew we were going to be bored for 20 minutes, because I wanted them to always use their time well. And so the cards were something I could just take and flash, and you can make up games with them. And they're, it's not like it's hard. You can even do it all auditorily before you do it visually, which he, of course, recommends in the Writing Road to Reading too.
Mhm.
Yeah. So tell us about that part. What does the title mean? Why is it the Writing Road to Reading?
Right. So and particularly a child that has some sort of dyslexic or dysgraphic, their body needs to match, not just the phonics, but to read it and to see that squiggle on the page become meaningful. She wanted their whole body engaged. So you can say them out loud with the flashcards while you're visually looking at them, but she would also have you look at the cards and write a very specific way. It's a manuscript course. It's print. And then because children with dysgraphia need to have the letters always be going the same way and over again, so it gets into their brain. It's that repetition that any physical therapy benefits you with. And so that was the writing part. And then the other thing is she had the spelling rules, because spelling rules are related to the phonics. And that was your introduction to writing actual or being able to spell actual words. So while you were writing a word, you were mixing in the phonics.
Mm.
Yeah. So again, as Amy mentioned, getting all of your senses, your whole body involved in solidifying the knowledge. That's good. Okay. So Amy, I noticed this is kind of a big book. It has large dimensions. It's kind
Yes,
of chunky, but a lot of it is really these references for
right.
the parents to memorize and keep with them. So can you kind of tell us about the book itself?
Oh yeah, the first half, and that's what I would say, don't get intimidated, just get some post-it notes and maybe get with a girlfriend and sit down with it. And because the first half of the book is the methodology, and I love, she uses all these terms that you're going to create a lifelong learner. I mean, I love the terminology she uses, which matches so much of what we do. So the first part of the book, you can kind of get a little bogged down because it's methodology, but what I've done is just read little sections, and she has like scripted portions, so you can just see how things sort of work. But the second half of the book, of course, is always my favorite, because she gives you list of all the phonograms, and she's arranged them in such a way that they're by letter, arranged in letters, and it's all laid out. If you go through it, she gives you list of literature that your children can read, and she even gradates it according to where they are, so to speak, in their phonetic world and what they've learned. And then she talks about rules like how you pronounce things. She gives you syllabication. She teaches one of the things, and all the rules, which I always love the rules. And sometime in my testimony, I'll get to why I love the rules, because I had a child that did this. We do this religiously for a number of years. But then she gives you, what I really love is that she gives you that spelling vocabulary list toward the back. And again, it's arranged like in sections like A through J, but she'll give you the word, and then she'll give you the rule of the 29 rules. So you know what that rule is, and that's a good way to review it for your child. And then, like Lee was saying, she'll tell you how your mouth feels like. She like bridge, your jaw shouldn't move, she says, like sign Gian, your tongue you should feel the top of your roof of your mouth with your tongue. And so she gives you these ideas about how things are pronounced, and she encourages you to do it very very specifically. And so you are articulating the words. So you have that whole section, and it goes all the way up through elementary. And then in the very, very back, she gives you a very just specific writing scope and sequence. Several scope and sequences, and it goes up to, she goes through K through 8. She calls it grade level, but of course you can use whatever is best for your child. But she gives you a tremendous amount of information. And if you just, the main thing to me that helps me is I just bookmark it with tabs, so I can just flip to those phonographs because I haven't memorized them like my child did. So I need that.
Amy, that kind of reminds me of in the My Fair Lady, right? The pronunciation lessons.
Yes.
Um, and many of us, I think, would benefit from some of those even as adults to clean up some of our messy use of our vocal abilities and the way we pronounce things.
That's true.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
Jennifer, can you speak to how what Amy just said, how that affected the spelling rules and the lists and the essentials curriculum?
Yeah, I will. And then I want to make a connection also to Scribblers. So as we said, there aren't that many exceptions. And so what we tried to do, just as Spalding covered these the general rules that will enable you to teach someone how to read and to spell. And we took the same idea into the spelling lists that are in the essentials curriculum, so that each week they're learning those same kind of rules to help you be able to spell anything. So instead of having, you know, lists of thousands and thousands of words, it's lists of common words and common combinations of sounds that will give you the keys to the other words. And so it really should give you the baseline for knowing how to spell virtually anything in English. Except maybe the really strange words, which always come from Greek. They
But
just
even
like
those,
different
they have the rule
combinations.
for, like, right, like
Yes.
nay, EIGH, and all the ways you use EIGH, and there's not a lot of them, so you can memorize it.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to, as Amy, as you were talking, the connection I wanted to make to Scribblers is really that so as you described, all those references are there for you as the parent to learn how to properly instruct your child in pronouncing the words or forming the letters. But when you are putting that information into practice with your kids, it can be a game. So it's really fun to have your child put their hand under their chin and break words into syllables. Once you know the rules, then to them, that's just a game. That's not the hard work of learning about syllabication. And also they like to say the word syllabication because it's fun for them.
Yes.
So once you get all of that information, you as the parent teacher, then you can turn it into these fun games that you play all the time as a family, as you practice. I mean, kids also like to recite spelling rules, just like E before I, except after C, or in sounding like A as in neighbor and way. Most of us remember that. It's sing-songy. You can chant it in the car. You can think of words that fit the rule, and it can just be a 15-minute game to reinforce that rule once you get them in your heart as the teacher. So
Yeah, I guess share some I'm just really proud of my daughter-in-law, April. Lily, when she's sounding out longer words, because she can read most of them at this point, she'll pause and she'll like say aloud her phonogram or the rule that goes with it. So I know it's being passed on to the next generation because it works. Why do something else?
Yes.
yes, as Tim mentioned, there have been a lot of experiments that were probably unnecessary because we already knew how to teach kids how to read. So yeah. All right. Well, before we get into our close reading and take our commercial break, I didn't know if anyone just had a burning story that you wanted to share of a sweet memory of teaching your kiddos to read or having a light bulb go off.
Well, I was thinking of this, Jen. I don't want to take give opportunity, but I was thinking specifically of this. We had one of our children really had a reading disability, pretty severe reading disability. And part of it was a visual issue that we worked really hard to restore. But also we spent a year doing the Spalding with a reading specialist. And he was 9, and he is unfortunate because we're a bunch of readers. And if you can't read, it's very hard. It was really hard for him emotionally. And he kept feeling like he would work really hard, but it's like always running up against that wall. He could not get past it. And I remember the day he was about 9, we were sitting on the couch and he reached over and picked up a book and started reading it for the first time. And I remember thinking, yes, it was like this freedom. I just thought, and finally, he had struggled so hard for so long. It was like finally it all came together. And I really, that's why I love the phonics. It's like I gave him tools that he could say, oh, I can use these now. And all of a sudden the world just went, wow, I now can, I have a freedom of reading. So to me, that was, he wasn't like, little kids are fun to teach and reading too. And I did with my other children, but that was a really big moment that when I saw him open, and I think, wow, he's reading a book. It was super cool. That was really neat.
Yeah, we have 4 children, and it's always great. My wife is the one who does most of the reading teaching of phonics with them. I sit down and read alongside them a lot, either to them or listen to them read as they're picking it up. They all learn at different rates. They're all ready at different times. So I think one of our big takeaways has always been try and see how it's going. And if you need to slow down or take a pause, do that. Don't get frustrated just because it doesn't stick the first time. But I always love listening to them read aloud after they've started to sort of take off on their own and they start reading in their heads, right? They stop reading aloud. And then you sit down with them and they start reading, and some of their phonics rules haven't quite fully stuck, and you get some of those mispronunciations that are wonderful and hilarious. Like one of ours loved the children's little kids books, the Geronimo Stilton stories, about a mouse detective, and he for a while went around calling him Geronimo Stilton.
That's fun. That's sweet. Fun memory.
Yeah, those are both good things to remind parents that as wonderful as phonics is and as natural as it is, our children do develop at different levels. And studies have shown over and over again that it's very difficult for a person to read before their myelin sheathing has grown over their entire nervous system. And for many children, that can be as old as 12 years old.
Yes.
And so don't think their child's a failure, you're a failure, phonics is a failure. Sometimes you just have to wait. And one of the ways that you can continue, because you want to milk that cow, you still want to keep at it, but not in a way that frustrates them, is to do things with magnets or sand or drawing on big boards, because sometimes their eyesight's not fully developed either, and they can do the phonics if they're bigger. To try a variety of things, but you can do it. Parents all over the world have been doing this for a long time. Even before the printing press, they were teaching their kids to read scrolls and marketing signs and various things.
Yeah, that's good. We've talked about this before, but I think it's worth saying again that sometimes when we start homeschooling our kids, we think that it's going to be this upward trajectory, and it does not look like that. It looks like you have a burst one day, and then you go like this and you hit a wall and you cannot get over the wall for a while. And then something developmentally happens, or you milked the cow long enough and you practiced and they finally made the connection, and then they go up for a while until you hit the next wall. So you don't want to discourage yourself thinking that it's going to be this upward pleasant slope of constant progress toward the top. That's not really what that looks like with us or our kids as we're learning something new.
The other thing that we can trip us up is we'll have that first or second child who just reads, and all this phonics just seems like overkill. Why? Well, as soon as you get the child that doesn't just read, you're going to wish you knew this. So I don't think it's ever a waste of time to learn to be more literate anymore. It's a waste of time to be more musical.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, do you want to take us to our commercial break, Lee, and then we'll read a bit out of the book?
Sure. We want to thank classicalconversationsbooks.com, where the books discussed can be purchased. We have the entire 2023 Words Aptly Spoken calendar archived at leebortons.com with links to the CC books from last year. And we've also got the 2024 list on leebortons.com. And then these episodes can be listened to at leebortons.com, my YouTube channel. Next week, we're going to discuss Ancient World Echoes, which Jennifer had the privilege of compiling, and it'll be like story time. So I expect it to be very fun. Jennifer is a really good reader, as is Tim, so I can't wait to hear you.
It'll be fun. Will you just show up? We're going to read the story and just discuss it. So I thought we'd start as we look at the text of Writing Road to Reading itself, and we don't have a whole lot of time left, so we'll just look at a few quotations. But I thought, Amy, you could kick us off. There's this analogy that kind of runs through the very beginning of the book. But also I thought there's some nice quotes from the foreword, which is not Spalding, but also sets us up well for what it's like to work with small kids. So you want to kick us off, Amy?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Teach the child what is of use to a child, Rousseau said, and you will find that it takes all his time. What is of use to a child interested in reading is explicit instructions in how the written language works, how it represents the sound of speech, how it is produced with tools like pencils and chalk, how it signifies words and ideas. A program that provides such instructions, specifically the Spalding program, absorbs children to an astonishing degree. It does indeed take all their time, or as much of it as teachers will allow. It's nice.
As you were reading, I was remembering long afternoons spent drawing giant letters in sidewalk chalk on our driveway.
Yeah.
Because Benjamin was quite happy to learn anything as long as we were outdoors. So we did a lot of things in sidewalk chalk on the driveway.
Yeah.
It was very absorbing. He would make giant letters on the driveway all afternoon.
Yeah, some kids are very motivated to learn to read, not necessarily because they're natural readers. They don't just pick it up, but I know some younger siblings, especially, they see their older siblings loving reading and being off doing their reading, and they want that, even though it means some work and maybe more work than they would normally be willing to invest in something sort of their own accord. But because they see the usefulness of it, something that they want to use, they'll embrace it.
Yeah, many of mine wanted to be able to read their books when I wasn't there and available to read them to them. They wanted to do that independently, and so they were willing to sit still.
You know, do you guys think this paragraph's true though now with our age of technology? Because I think about my kids that wanted to read were pretty much pre-internet. Why go ahead and learn to read if you can just watch a video, which is a 15-year-old answer. Like, it's only been around that long, everything before that. So of course, if you wanted to enter into interesting stories, you had to read. That's been robbed. Am I wrong?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, not entirely wrong. I know at our house we restrict access in part to force reading until it becomes a habit, until it becomes part of their lives. At which point I think there's still the temptation toward the videos and other ways of getting information, but at least there's the capacity for reading.
Yeah, explain what you mean by capacity, because I think that's important that you just said that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good place for YouTube videos to learn some things. I don't have any trouble with watching a quick synopsis of something, but you'll never get out of a YouTube video or even a long movie everything that you get out of reading a book. My family loves Pride and Prejudice, and we love the long BBC version. That's really a very faithful embodying of the text. But you're not engaging your own imagination when you watch the movie. So much of it is interpreted for you that you don't have to do the work when you watch it. It may be easier to watch the movie, and in some ways, therefore, more pleasurable in the short term, but you lose the pleasure of the long term of your imagination and the joy of the things that you see in your head when you read. And I want that for my kids, that they would go beyond the immediate pleasure and see the long view.
Yeah, I just think, oh goodness, this is like a soapbox for me, because I just think to introduce your children to reading, I just think of how the scripture is arranged, that is all written and you're listening to it. And so you are shaping and forming the images in your head, and you are engaging with it and expanding your understanding of it purely from your own mind, your own memory, your own experience. This is like this. It becomes very personal and very so much interactive. You're so much interacting with the story because you're attending to those details. And I think it's just me. I don't like movies because I feel like they rob me of that. They either, if I see it before I read the book, it's like those images are stuck in my head, and they wouldn't have been there if I had just read. But if I read a story and then I see a movie, it's like, oh no, Charlotte's Web is not like that at all. It's just, I'm like, no, that's not who Wilbur is. I don't mind illustrations because they're captured, but somehow I feel like it preempts me. So really, I think for literacy, it's reading to your kids just so much, and then delaying that, like you said, Tim, delaying that visual aspect of story for a while, and really helping them taste the fruit of that imagining, and helping them see how delightful it is, and then giving them opportunity. Our kids wrote all sorts of crazy stories. I was thinking when I read this quote, what they got into was dictating stories, the boys did, and they were all like, the rat sat on the hat and Sam had a ham, and they're onto these crazy stories. I have composition books full of these crazy stories, but they were so fun. They engaged them so well. And I do sort of grieve that that children this day and age, that they start with, oh, I saw that as a movie, and it just makes me sad, like, oh, you missed out on Charlotte's Web. So
We're sympathetic.
yeah. So
Well, so we started today talking about the importance of reading, and we've kind of just continued that just now as we're thinking about what's different between video and reading. But Tim, do you want to read us our next quote that kind of deepens and enriches that even more? Why is it so important for us to pass this down?
Sure. English has become an international means of communication. Scholars estimate that more than 1 billion people speak English. And that's a dated statistic. It's probably significantly more than that now. It is a required study in the schools of most countries, and its use is expanding rapidly in scientific and technological fields. E.g., its use is mandatory in international aviation communications. Expansion is basically because English has the richest and largest vocabulary, simple inflections, and no genders, and is, except for its spelling, perhaps the easiest language to learn. The ability to convey and receive information through this rich medium takes on added importance in democratic nations whose preservation depends on a literate people. Civilization is not inherited. Its advance is contingent on the ability of each generation to fully communicate and teach its children the recorded wisdom of past ages.
Thanks for reading that, Tim, and thank you, Jennifer, for pulling that out of the introduction. I mean, this is why it's a curated curriculum. These ideas are everywhere in every book that we've read, and what a lot of wisdoms in this paragraph.
Yeah, and it is, teaching our kids to read gives them access to that recorded wisdom of the past ages as we teach them to read, but also as we guide their reading. So I know we're just about out of time, so maybe I'll move to that next quote, which kind of builds on this, which is from way later in the book. It's from page 199, and she's talking about helping your kids be readers, because she also has some lovely lists of children's books in the Writing Road to Reading that are worth checking out. But she says, fine literature explicitly or implicitly sets forth standards of conduct. It teaches about character, nobility, beauty, and other virtues, as well as the consequences of their absence. And I know I've thought about that as I'm building our library or choosing what to read aloud to my kids or what they can read themselves. So does anyone have a closing thought on that?
Yeah, pick well. the books that you put in front of your kids. There are some books that are much beloved, but really don't teach the things that we want to teach our kids. I know that I remember loving the Berenstain Bears when I was a kid, and as a parent, I read those books and sort of shudder because the children learn consequence-free lessons in those books. And so you're missing the second half, right? When there's when there's an absence of those virtues, there's no consequence. And that's not real life. You're teaching them some sort of a fairy imagining of what life is like. So give them King Arthur and Robin Hood and all sorts of good things that teach nobility, and stay away from the things that just show grumpy, modern, immature people.
They can look in the mirror if they want to see that story.
Yes. Yes,
For sure.
oh,
Yeah. Well, we've had the privilege to be part of a literate culture, even in its decline. That our circle of friends were literate, and our children are now literate. And I just really pray that the next generation of classical conversations homeschool kids will appreciate the opportunity to read the books that we have. So choosing well is something that we've had the privilege to do for the adults and the challenge students. And I'm excited about next week because I think Jennifer's chosen very well in our children's literature series. That's kind of the books that Tim is referring to. So I look forward to talking about them next week with you guys. Thanks for being